Egypt-China relations have received a new strong push with the continuous meetings between President Sisi and the Chinese counterpart, President Xi Jinping, recently on the sidelines of the first China-Arab summit held in Saudi Arabia. President Sisi lauded strong relations between Egypt and China, stating that Egypt has always been keen to boost cooperation with China at all levels and through the bilateral framework of the Egyptian-Chinese Comprehensive Strategic Partnership. The frequency of Sisi's visits to China reflect the strength of ties between the two countries and their desire to build on a long list of achievements to the benefit of their peoples. These meetings help to enhance mutual political trust between the two countries and achieve fruitful results in economic, commercial, and political cooperation. Thus, the China-Egypt Comprehensive Strategic Partnership has become a model of solidarity, cooperation, and mutual benefit between China and Arab, African, and developing countries. China and Egypt have further consolidated mutual political trust and friendship when they immediately started cooperating on the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. China and Egypt built the first joint COVID-19 vaccine production line on the African continent last year. On their latest meeting, Sisi and Xi discussed boosting cooperation in scientific research and transferring technologies in pharmaceutical industries, the manufacture of coronavirus vaccines, and China's expertise in combating the pandemic. The meeting between the two presidents was also important as it reflected China's increasingly important role in Africa and the Middle East. Through the years, China has proved to be a reliable partner for nearly all countries in Africa and the Arab world, supporting their legitimate causes such as demanding an independent Palestinian state or rejecting the interference of domineering Western nations in their affairs. However, in recent years, and after a strong comeback by China, the joint interests with the Arab world were not limited to political stands. During President Sisi's last visit to Beijing, both presidents agreed to expand Egypt's cooperation in the Belt and Road Initiative, which will certainly promote Egypt and China's economic interests. Egypt spares no effort to motivate Chinese businessmen to open up to investment opportunities in Egypt and attract more Chinese investments. Sisi and Xi tackled boosting cooperation in industrial and information technologies, as well as the manufacture of electric vehicles. In the same framework, the Chinese president agreed to help Egypt advance projects such as the development of the Suez Canal Economic Zone. This vital zone will hopefully turn into an economic hub in which Chinese investments can play a vital role. From there, Chinese exports will have easy access to the rest of Africa and the Middle East. Egypt's ties to China are historic, and Beijing knows that Cairo is a reliable partner. Last year, Egypt and China marked the 65th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic ties between the two countries. Egypt having been the first African and Arab state to establish diplomatic relations with the People's Republic of China. By taking part in the opening of the Olympic Games, Egypt also confirmed its agreement with the Chinese view that the aim of the Olympic Games was to bring people together and that there should be no politics involved when it comes to competing in sports. On January 24th, Egypt celebrated the Beijing Winter Olympics by lighting the historic Cairo Tower with the slogans Beijing 2022 and See You in Beijing in Arabic, English, and Chinese. The tower also played the official song of the Beijing Winter Olympics, Together for a Shared Future. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, continuing our discussion with Dr. Amir. Dr. Amir, whenever we meet and discuss different topics and these different summits and conferences, even if they're economic or cultural ones, you always mention a political undertone or subtext to these meetings. Now, The whole world is witnessing a Ukrainian-Russian conflict that's been going on for 11 months now. And China is a strong ally for Russia. And it really, it poses the question of these meetings between China and the Gulf states and China and Egypt. Does it have any sort of political bearing on a political direction that these countries might share with China? Does China becoming a supporter or bound by a strong relation with Russia, does it have any sort of effect on other countries economically as well?
Well, it's not economically also. Let's say that the appetite of the Chinese government has been opened now after the Russian-Ukrainian war. Why is that? Well, the key word is Taiwan. And I think that they want to ensure the fact that the day when, as it happened with the Donbass region and the approaching of NATO towards the borders of Russia, and Russia had to act and to make this special operation to protect the civilians, the Russian civilians inside the Donbass and liberate these places. I think that the Chinese also, they have in mind, what if the Americans one day would put missiles in Taiwan and threaten our security? They won't have any solution but to act. By the way, we had the same threat in Libya. And President Sisi said there is a red line. Unfortunately, it was respected. If not, the president at that time said we will act. So every country do not underestimate any movements on the borders. So answering your question, well, it's obvious that the Chinese are securing allies, securing economic relations with other countries in the prospect that maybe one day they will have to act as the Russians did, and they will do it in Taiwan and militarily invade Taiwan. And they want to be sure that there will be sanctions, but no one will join the US, as it happened with the Russians also. We didn't really join the US and the Europeans, which is a huge success for the Russian diplomacy. So they are having the same mindset now, preparing for the prospect that one day, if Beijing will attack Taiwan, defense or what, call it as you want, but at that time, Egypt won't be hostile towards China. The Gulf states will not be against China. They will have many friends, and maybe this is the Chinese diplomacy is accelerating this to ensure friends. Remember, for example, when Egypt had to work on the file of the Ethiopian dam, we contacted many of our friends in the UN, and they stood beside Egypt. And we managed to secure our position. The same thing, the Chinese are securing diplomatically their presence.
Well, does it mean that, the strong bond between China and Russia and the common sort of policy that they both follow, does that mean that they might lose more friends within the European continent, or will they lose maybe trade partners or less economic cooperation, or the European countries are basically putting everything political and military aside? They also want to look after their own economic interests and partnerships with the second biggest economy in the world, China. And does that also reflect on China wanting to put more eggs in Egypt's and the Gulf's basket?
Well, I'll answer the question by another question, if you permit that. I will tell you and ask you, are the Europeans willing to take the same adventure as they took against Russia, again with China. They cannot afford it. Their economies cannot really afford new sanctions and new boycotts following Washington's steps. It will be devastating for the European economy. That's for sure this time. And it will be a suicide. So I think that they are not, that's why Beijing is not really interested in the cooperation with the Europeans now. I mean diplomatic negotiations. They do not wish to ensure any friends there because they know that they already have a presence in Europe and heavy presence. The second point, what's the EU now? What's really the EU? You have Hungary, for example, with Viktor Orban, who said, we are against the sanctions against Russia now. So there is a split inside the EU. Brussels went to the point to think about imposing some sanctions against Budapest at a certain time, because they said they are not following us. And then they said we cannot attack ourselves inside the European body. So even the European bloc now has a huge problem with that. Olaf Scholz, the German chancellor, was the first German chancellor to go to Beijing. And he went there when the sanctions with Russia failed. He started talking with the Chinese. It's not the other way. It's not China who went to Germany. So that means that he's the most powerful economic country in Europe, and he doesn't wish to lose the remaining of this alliance or cooperation. So yes, they will put aside all that. That's why China is focusing on Egypt and the Gulf states. They're following exactly the same steps of Russia. It's just they're copying everything.
Yes.
And pasting everything. Relations with the Arab countries, with the Gulf states, with Egypt, with Africa, ensuring all these friends, and then face the West.
Dr. Amir, now you've explained why or what would be of great interest from China trying to strengthen its relations with Egypt and other Arab countries politically and economically and the security-wise and everything. Now, since 2014 till 2022, President Sisi has visited China 7 times. Now, taking out the years of the coronavirus pandemic, that's a rate of a visit a year. So what would Egypt want from China, the second biggest economy in the world and a major global superpower? What can we benefit? What do we want from stronger relations with China, politically, obviously, and economically as well?
We want to tell the world that the era of one superpower is nearing to an end. There are several superpowers in the world. And this is an alarming message, of course, to the West, that countries like Egypt at a certain time didn't really approach China on that level. Egyptian presidents in the past visited China once a year or 2 or 3 times, not 7 times, as you said, since 2014, and really opening our market to the Chinese. I think that what we want from China is strong friendship. First of all, it's not only about economy. It's also, as I said, like the Chinese. You need them as a member of permanent member of the Security Council. They will secure the votes. It will. For instance, if Egypt one day decided to take any step to defend its national security and sovereignty, and it didn't suit the West, of course they will act through the UN first and try to gather some resolutions against us. If you won't have diplomatic friends or diplomatic pillars inside the Security Council, like China and Russia, we will be in a bad situation like Iraq was and Libya was. So we have to ensure, as the ensuring friends, we are telling them also, you have to be in our back, because we have, I don't say the same enemies, but the same obstacles towards our prosperity and our growth.
And obviously economic investments
Yes.
and cooperation, that would also be high on the agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, definitely a meeting that took place between Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry and President Sisi with the Chinese Foreign Minister, a meeting that is quite significant, and it is the first visit by the Chinese Foreign Minister to Egypt since he assumed office, laying the blueprint and the groundwork for future Egyptian-Chinese relations that hopefully will be blossoming and strengthening in the future. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this edition of the Daily Debate. But before we go, I'd like to thank my distinguished guests, as always, Dr. Sherif Amir, the Professor of Geopolitical Affairs at the University of Paris. Dr. Amir, always a pleasure having you with us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much,
Thank
sir.
you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please stay tuned for more coming up on Nile International. I'm Henny Saif. Thank you for joining us.